Today we begin the third chapter, which is pretty much an X-ray of the neshama itself. If you notice, as much as he deals with very lofty ideas in this Perek, which is experience of the neshama. In other words, if you took the neshama and you were able to look at it, this is what you will see in the neshama. And the same token, in this Perek, in this chapter 3, he doesn't say a word, literally not a word, about the actual service of God, which is an expression, or rather the neshama itself, as we could all understand, the neshama as it sits in Gan Eden, as it sits in heaven, in paradise. It cannot put on tefillin, it cannot speak words of Torah, it cannot shake a lulav of an esrog, and it cannot perform any mitzvah. Understandably so. One would ask, why isn't it kind of on all the way up there? In other words, it's divested. It's not limited with the limitations and the challenges of the body. It's separate from the body. Apparently, if we're in the body, we're told that we could and we should. We ought to keep Torah mitzvahs. When the neshama is liberated from the body and all the bodily limitations, apparently that's a place where it should be able to perform Torah mitzvahs even more. The answer is no. Because in order to put on tefillin, as an example, to do any mitzvah, you need a hand. You need a physical hand to put on tefillin. The neshama in Gan Eden cannot put on tefillin. It doesn't have the ability to attach to anything physical. It cannot even utter words of Torah. It could learn Torah on the level, and it does learn Torah. It learns everything. It relearns everything in a very much deeper manner, everything that what it learned over here in this world. But it cannot verbalize words of Torah because it doesn't have a mouth. It doesn't have speech. And it doesn't even have that type of structured thought that we have over here in this physical body. So in the fourth chapter, in other words, the neshama has to invest into a system which contains thought, speech, and action, which via the thought, speech, and action, it could ultimately perform Torah mitzvahs. The way we know the Torah mitzvahs over here, which is action, words, and so on and so forth. Deeds, speech, and even thought, which are associated with Torah mitzvahs. So these are called, we will see in the chapter 4, actually chapter 4 begins that there's the three garments which the neshama enters, and via these three garments, or these three garments which neshama invests in, they are investments, they are clothes, they're garments for the neshama, that via these three garments, which is thought, speech, and action, the neshama is able to actualize the Torah mitzvahs, observe the Torah mitzvahs, to learn, to daven, to put on tefillin, and so on and so forth. When the neshama is not invested in these garments, it cannot do all that. So is there a virtuous experience with the neshama experiences when it's divested from the body, when it's in Gan Eden? The answer is absolutely. The neshama has a wonderful experience. In a sense, its appreciation to God and godliness when it's in Gan Eden is much greater than when it's in this physical world, because here it's limited by the bodily and bodily limitations, while when it's in Gan Eden, it doesn't have it, is liberated from these bodily limitations, and therefore it could experience God and derive pleasure and experience God and godliness in a much greater and more pleasurable level. Absolutely, its love to Hashem is genuine. Its fear from Hashem is genuine, as opposed to when it enters into the body. Obviously, it's already in order to bring it out, we have to pierce through different levels in order that the neshama should truly love and fear Hashem, etc. So, the advantage of when it invests in the body, that it is able to enclose itself into the three garments of thought, speech, and action. The disadvantage is when it's involved in the thoughts in this physical body, involved in this structure of thought, speech, and action, and these garments, it's limited by these three garments. In other words, it's because it's a garment for the neshama. The neshama is it's not restricted, but it has to, in order to express itself, it needs these garments. When it's liberated from the body, so it's able to appreciate and derive pleasure from God and godliness on a much greater and deeper level, but it cannot perform Torah mitzvahs. So this chapter 3, you'll see, as much as he deals with the most pleasurable experience of the neshama, you won't find a word in the entire chapter, third chapter, regarding Torah mitzvahs. Nothing about learning Torah, nothing about doing mitzvahs. And apparently it's kind of the x-ray of the neshama, and the neshama wants to do what Hashem wants. Why is a whole chapter which deals with the all the levels and the natural experiences of the neshama, doesn't say a word of Torah mitzvahs, of observing, learning Torah and doing mitzvahs? And it only begins in the fourth chapter. The answer is because here you're dealing with the neshama itself. And because the neshama itself, before it enters into that world of these garments of thought, speech, and action, it cannot perform Torah mitzvahs. So what is so special about it? That it has within itself the ability to experience the more deeper and profound expressions of connection to Hashem as love, fear. These are emotional connections, a perfect or a very comprehensive understanding in the reality of godliness, which again, this is very similar to the neshama, the way it's in Gan Eden. It doesn't put on tefillin, it doesn't utter the words of Torah or so, it understands Torah, but it's enabled to appreciate the more deeper parts of what it consists of, or deeper parts of God, and in other words, the more profound expressions in its relationship to God. So, because we're dissecting the neshama, dealing with the neshama over here, before it invests into the three garments of thought, speech, and action, you won't find anything of the idea of Torah mitzvahs, because this is dealing with the neshama the way neshama is. So let's just with that introduction, which sets a little bit of clarity over here, how much the Alter Rebbe shows us that the neshama itself, the makeup of the neshama is all about its excitement with God. That's the makeup of the neshama. It understands God. It has the ability and has the faculties to understand God. It has the ability to love God. It has the ability to fear God, and all the other seven characters, which is associated with the midot, the attributes of man. The neshama, the neshama has it all, and because it has it all, it's enabled to have this comprehensive understanding of God. It's enabled to have this genuine love and fear of God, and so on and so forth. So this is the third chapter. It deals with the neshama prior to the neshama entering into the world of the garment. Now, it doesn't refer to the neshama the way it's in Gan Eden. It doesn't refer to the neshama the way it's in the heavens above. Not at all. It refers to the neshama the way it's down here in the body. But in the same token, it's dealing with the dimension of the neshama prior to its entering into the world of thought, speech, and action, which via thought, speech, and action you could perform Torah mitzvahs. So we'll start. We begin. All these different levels, all levels associated with these three, which was mentioned in the previous chapters, which is nefesh, ruach, and neshama. Klula mi'eser b'chinas. It is comprised from 10. It consists from 10 different to 10 levels. Kineged, which correspond to Esas Sfiras Elyonos, to the supreme Sfirat of Hakadosh Baruch Hu, of Hashem. Shenishtal shel mehen. For that matter, that is the makeup of the neshama. It comes from God. So just like in the heavenly spheres, there is 10 separate levels, which we will see what are the 10 separate levels. We spoke about it in previous classes. There's the Chachma Bina Das, which is usually divided and compartmentalized. Chachma Bina Das are the intellectual faculties, while Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yisod, these are the attributes. These are the more emotional faculties of man. So where does it come from that man has this structured 10 sfirot? It comes from the way it is in the heavens above, the way it is by God. Why do we have something which is similar to the way it is above, the way it is by God? The answer, because we are a part of God. So if God, in the way it is in the worlds above, again associated with the more profound levels of godliness, it's divided into 10. So too, on this level in our neshama, we also have these faculties which are again divided and compartmentalized into Chachma Bina Das, which is again our cognitive, intellectual faculties. And then you have the midot, which are the attributes, the emotional faculties, which the human being expresses. In this case, the human being, the way he's associated with the godly soul, the way the godly soul expresses its love and fear to Hashem. So he says the reason again, why does it correspond to the Esses Vidus Alienis? Because Nishtal Shulumehen, because that's where it comes from. So we have 10, but these 10 nechlokes, they're divided into 2. What are the 2? Shalish imot v'sheva kfulot. 3 mothers and sheva kfulot, and this refers to the 7 attributes. Now, there's other reasons why it's called kfulot. You can see it over here in brief. He explains why kfulot, but we're not going to get into it. Takes a little bit more explanation, but just what we see over here, that these 10 are divided into 2, and understandably so, because when you're dealing with the intellectual faculty, the cognitive faculties are very different than the midot, than the attributes of man, because this is the world of intellect and this is the world of emotion. Now the world of intellect is divided into 3, and we're going to understand what is the difference when you say chachma, bina, das, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Apparently each one of them is another expression of an intellectual expression of man, but we will see what's the difference of each one of them, because each one plays another role in our understanding and perceiving any concept, and in this case, when you're dealing with a godly concept. So too, v'shiva simei habinyan, the 7 attributes, which are chesed, gvura, tiferes, kindness, severity. Tiferes is beauty. Hoid Yisoid Malchus, which is Netzach Hoid Yisoid Malchus, which we will see as well. And eventually, also, the Alter Rebbe deals with each one separately, even though they're all all the 7 attributes are very much anchored in the first 2, which is Chesed and Gvura, which is kindness and severity, giving and restraint, which you see the opposite, the 2 contrasts. Chesed is kindness, Gvura is holding back. And Alter Rebbe later says that each one of them has a root really in Chesed and Gvura, because they're in the opposite extreme. But there are Shivas Yimei Binyan. There's 7 ways a person expresses his emotion. With Chesed, with kindness; with Gvura, with severity; stringency. He doesn't. Tiferes is a combination of both, which is associated also with Rachmanut, mercy, compassion. Netzach, we all have that midah of being victorious. Hoid is associated also with glory, Hoid v'hadar, and then Yisoid is bonding, connection. Malchus is dignity, royalty. So these are the 7 attributes, and again, the reason why they're divided into 2, because this is intellectual and this is emotional. This is the way it is in the heavens above, and again, you're dealing with Hashem, metaphorically speaking, or kaviyachal, like he says many times, this expression kaviyachal. By Hashem, this exists also, these 10 levels. And because we are a part of our neshama, as part of Hashem, therefore, v'kach b'nefesh ha'adam, so too in the soul of man, nechlekes l'shtayim is also divided into 2, seichel u'midot, intellect and attributes and character. What is the seichel? We said is kol chachma bina, the chachma bina v'das. When we deal with seichel, with intellect, again, this is all the intellect of the neshama, not the nefesh bahamis, the animal soul, which we dealt in the first pedic. This comes in continuation of the 2nd chapter, which said that the yid possesses a neshama which is part of God. And if a part of God has wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, which is chachma bina das, what is it intellectualizing? What is it trying to understand? One thing only, because we're dealing with the neshama, it's trying to understand God, because it's a godly neshama. When you're dealing with the chachma bina das, let's say the animal soul, it's trying to find its ways, even to a certain extent intellectually, how to express, how to be a little more animalistic, how to be indulgent in worldly or maybe animalistic pleasures, temptations, and so on. That's the chachma bina das of the animal soul. It means it uses its mind how to find favor, or how to find a pull, or how to derive a drive to things which are animalistic when you're dealing with the nefesh bahamis. But here we're dealing, it comes in continuation to Perek Bey, the 2nd chapter, with the godly soul, which is again part of God. So the part of God has seichel, has intellect, and again the way it's divided into chachma, bina, das. We will see in a moment what is the function of chachma, what is the function of bina, what is the function of das. But one thing is clear: because we're dealing with the chachma, bina, das of the godly soul, what is it pursuing? It's pursuing godliness. What is it looking forward to understand, or to have a comprehensive understanding? in God and godliness. Nothing else interests. Nothing else interests the soul. Again, because it's part of God. Like someone's going to say, "Could you have a pleasure? Would you have a pleasure in spinning pebbles a whole day?" No, I'm not. It doesn't interest me, because a normal, healthy person finds pleasure in things which are more exciting, or an intellectual person finds pleasure in things in intellectual pursuits, because that's what the person's made of. He's an intellectual person. This is his makeup. The same thing here. We're not dealing with the nefesh of the animal soul. We're dealing with the nefesh of the godly soul. Nefesh of a godly soul is part of God. So if it's part of God and it has seichel and it has intellect, what is it pursuing? Nothing else in the world other than God. How is it pursuing God with its intellect? So again, it has the chachma, it has the bina, and it has the das. It has the wisdom, it has the understanding and knowledge. And again, we'll see in a moment what is the function of each. Now, it has midos, it has attributes. We said before, the attributes are divided into 7: chesed, gvura, tiferes, netzach, hod, yisod, malchus. So we deal with chesed, kindness associated with love. When you say that the neshama has that character of love to what? To a nice car. The neshama has no interest in a nice car. No interest whatsoever. It's not even a challenge for the neshama. If it's a nice car, not a nice car, it's not even in that world. Take, for example, the neshama, it's in Gan Eden. The Gemara says that the person leaves this world, after a certain time he forgets chezu de hayalma. Whatever this world looks like, it's not even a distant memory. Nothing of this world is anything real to the neshama once it parts this world. At all. It might be interested in it. Maybe it could be that people try to be mazkir neshamis. They try to remember the neshama. The neshama should be sitch on high for the people living down below in this world. Yes, it doesn't mean that it knows exactly the details of the way it understood or related to this world prior to when it's left this world. It's drawing energy. It maybe feels the needs of the people over here, and it draws a certain energy that when this energy becomes manifest in this world, it will hopefully be expressed to give the descendants, let's say, of this person, or if it's a tzaddik, it would manifest in a way that it would give parnasa and it would give health and so on. But what it is, we ask a tzaddik's neshama, or even when we mazkir neshamas, we mention neshamas, and we ask they should draw blessing, they're not necessarily there in tune to the reality over here. They would draw energy, right? A certain energy which, once it comes into this realm of this physical world, so it would be expressed and hopefully in parnasa, in health, and so on. But the neshama, prior to it, once it leaves this world, after a while, the Gemara says clearly, it forgets the whole chesed ha'alma, whatever this world looks like. Understandably so, because it's living in a different plane. So even when the neshama is down here in this world, because we're dealing with a godly neshama, it has nothing else in mind other than God. So when a neshama loves, has ava, what does it have ava to? Nothing else other than avas Hashem, loving Hashem. Because again, you're not dealing with the animal soul, which it had true. The animal soul has love. It likes another physical pleasure, and anything which contributes to its pleasure, that's what it's driven to. That's the love of the animal soul. It loves things which are animalistic. When you're dealing with a nefesh elikis, which is a separate soul completely, a separate world. We learned Nefesh Hasheni is the second chapter began. It's a part of God. So when a part of God has the character of Ava, Chesed, it's Avas Hashem, loves Hashem. If it has Pachad, fear, awe, or Yirasei, again another expression of fear, awe, reverence, it's about Hashem. Ulefare, if it has an interest to glorifying, it's lefarei, to glorify Hashem, because again, the whole makeup of the neshama is that it's a chelik elakami mal mamash. It's a part of God. The next page, v'chabad nikru imeis u'mokr lemides. Chabad, which is the wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, which we just dealt with. Again, we dealt with it in yet tell us what is the function of Chachma, what is the function of Bina, what is the function of Das. But one thing we understand, that Chabad is Nikra Imais Umakar Lemides. It's called mothers and a source to the Midah, to the attribute, to why? Because Hamidis Intel is Chabad. The attributes are the offsprings of wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. This concept that attributes are the offspring of the cognitive faculties really doesn't belong to the neshama. That's something which makes sense. When you are driven to something, you sit in front of a computer, you never knew what this computer is all about. Someone tells you and explains you all the benefits which you can gain personally, perhaps in your business, or as you can communicate with people, you start learning about something. The more you understand something, the more you develop, you could even call it a love, or let's call it a drive to it. Prior to understanding it, it looked like nothing to you, or meaningless to you. It had no meaning, it had no significance to you. So when you understand something, that produces a feeling. And the same thing works the other way. There's something, for example, crawling in your yard. All right, you don't give it any attention, and you even be able to be in the same place, in the same domain as where that thing is, because no one ever told you anything about it. All of a sudden, you start learning that someone tells you and explains you that could be dangerous. And it explains you the details or the details about this, let's say, creature. As an example, you could use this example in any way. It tells you, someone explains you all the reasons why this animal is dangerous. The moment you start understanding it, settles in your mind that you perceive and you understand what the other person explained to you about that creature. When you're going to go out there, you're going to stand in awe, not in the context of awe and reverence, but you fear that. Why didn't you fear that before? It's because you had no understanding what that's all about. So when you understand something thoroughly, that will bring about a certain midah, a certain character. If it's a good thing, if it's something that would excite you, it would develop and it would arouse a love, a drive to it. If it's something which would disappoint you, it'll express not only you become like, oh, it doesn't make sense, I should be in the same place of that thing. No, you really feel a sense of fear in your heart from that thing. Why? Because you understood it. So this is across the board. This is not particularly pertinent to the nefesh elokis, to the godly soul. Wisdom, brain, intellect is the source to any attribute, for attributes are developed according to what we understand. You understand something thoroughly, you develop a feeling to it. It depends what it is. If it's something again which is it's a thought, it's a process which is going to bring you excitement, so you'll have a drive to it. It's going to bring you fears, you're going to be fearful from it. So the same thing when we were dealing with the godly soul. The Chabad, in other words, how does the person get excited about God and godliness? How does he develop a love to Hashem? How does he develop a fear from Hashem? It doesn't come just like that on its own. It starts, there's a process. The person has a thorough understanding, a very comprehensive, relatively right, comprehensive understanding of God and godliness. Automatically that would develop in his heart different way. It'd be a sense of awe, because you're dealing with this great Hashem. So before you understood Hashem, before you had this thorough understanding of Hashem, not necessarily you would have a real sense of awe of this great Hashem. But when you invest with you become cognizant about it, a certain clarity is set up on your mind, then that automatically gives birth to feelings, which again, if it's love, it's fear, it's tiferet, and so on and so forth. Ubir ha'inyan, which is more towards the bottom of the page. Now the Alter Rebbe is going to explain us what's the difference of chokhmah, bina, and eventually toward the end of the chapter, das. He says, Ki ha'seichel shebenefesh ha'maskeles. Shu ha'maskil kol davar. When you're dealing with the intellect, which exists within the nefesh, with this intellectual nefesh, which is able to maskil, to understand, to perceive anything, this is called chokhmah. This is called wisdom. And why is it called wisdom? If you notice that the chokhmah, if you divide the words chokhmah, you have two words, koach ma. A koach of what? What is that connection, koach of what? Of the first step of expressing intellect. So we will not much elaborated inside, but we'll just try to explain it. And he says over here, koach ma. You see the first words of the following page, the potential of what is. And this idea of chokhmah as the initial state of any intellectual pursuit, really is not exclusive to the godly soul, but the godly soul works the same way as any other intellectual pursuit. For example, I'm looking into a book, and and I'm trying to understand what the sentence means. I'm taught, I go to school, and they told me read these pages, and tomorrow you're having an exam, so I'm very serious to know everything what it says, and I'm reading a page, it's very difficult for me to understand. The way it works, and obviously it comes a certain time you do understand it, like everybody who went to school knows there's a time there's a state when he did not understand what it says, and then he worked on it till he understands it, and eventually it shines. In other words, he has no issue with it. He reads the page, he knows exactly what it says, and then sometimes he knows it so well that someone would ask him, what does it mean? He'd be able to tell the person. Take the same person a day ago or a year ago, didn't understand, we begin to understand what it meant. Like even in Lahabdil, when we learn a Blat Gemara, you knew this Blat. When you opened the Blat the first time, especially when you did with a hard Blat, it was like you didn't begin to understand what it meant. And then you thoroughly, right? You start investing your mind in understanding what the Gemara says, and you look again, and you look again, and you look again, and you try to make sure that there's not one extra word, right? When we know when there's extra words on a page, usually means that we don't really figure out what's really going on. There's never supposed to be not an extra word, not in Gemara, not in Rashi, not in Tosfos. When you see extra words, you realize that something, you'd be missing the whole point, because there's no such a thing, there's no extra words in any part of Torah. And I'm not talking about the written Torah, the Torah Shabbat, which the Chachamim extract from these different details and nuances. Simply when you see a piece of Gemara, there's a question, there's an answer. It has to shine. Every word has to shine for you to say, yes, I know what the Gemara says. But there was a time when it was blank. You were blank, right? But this, again, is not excluded to Gemara. Any subject the person learns, any intellectual subject the person learns. What happens? What is the process from not understanding to understanding? The process works, again, it's not exclusive, not to Gemara, it's not exclusive to the godly soul. But from the way we'll understand it in any, again, and trying to understand anything, we'll be able to apply it to the godly soul, because that's how it works when you're dealing with seichel, of a state of not knowing to a state of knowing. So what happens is, you work very hard, and everybody tells you it's not Chinese. It's a statement, it's a sentence which you could make out what says in the sentence. So you work hard and you put your brain to it, and suddenly, that makes sense. At that moment, think about an example. That moment, your friend, which is trying to, let's say, understand it together with you, and says, "What you jumped? Could you tell me what does it say?" You were kind of excited. I just figured it out. What are these words telling me? It starts, the flash went on. In other words, you see really what these words are conveying to you. And your friend, theoretically, are going to imagine your friend is sitting next to you and says, "What did you understand? What did you get excited about?" The average person, which is the first time learning this and understanding this, won't be able to explain his friend exactly what he figured out. Even, it's not that you were lying when you jumped and you said, "Yes, I got it." You got something. You see those words, you saw the combination of the words, you saw the message, what these words are conveying to you. But the initial state that we connect to any concept is a kind of, in a way, it's like a flash. For example, and a flash could be very bright. A flash could be very bright, but you don't have it thoroughly enough to say that you have it, it's yours, to the extent you can give it over to a friend. It will never work that way, and you could see, even to you, you figured it out. I can't explain to you yet, give me a few more moments, I gotta develop it till I could say that it's mine, I have it, and then I can explain to you. Now, think about a flash. You could have a similar case. For example, you're walking and you see a lightning in front of you, and a lightning is very bright, and it can be very dangerous also, because the flash could really chas v'shalom corner in, and come down into it could get even the lightning. It's not somewhere very far. It can be dangerous because it comes very low many times. And you're walking, and all of a sudden you see a lightning, and the whole world brightens up. It can be pitch dark, but the world in front of you brightens up. And someone says, you say, "Wow, it's bright." And someone says, "Okay, could you show me that brightness?" I show it to you. It's gone a second after I saw it. Does it mean that the world in front of you didn't shine brightly in the moment you saw it? Yes, it did. But because a flash is something that comes and goes, within a second, you cannot show your friend anymore that flash, because it came and went. Similarly, our first approach to any intellectual, when we're into anything intellectual we're trying to figure out, the first approach is that there's some flash comes on, but it's something which remains abstract to the great extent, and then you need more time to take that flash and develop it. So the flash is called Chokhmah. We right away figure out why the Alter Rebbe over here divided the Chokhmah, showed you that Chokhmah is it's two words, which is Koach Ma, which means it's a koach, it's enormous strength. It's your first attachment to this concept, but yet is ma. Ma means what? What means that it's still abstract. It's not tangible. It's not palpable to you yet. That's why it's called koach. Koach means it's enormous strength, but it's ma, what? Which means you have it and you don't have it in the same time. The flash went on, but it's only a flash. That is the chokhmah. The Alter Rebbe will explain before how it's relevant to the godly soul. What is the godly soul catching when he understands his first flash in his perception of godliness? And then what is the bina? But here the Alter Rebbe is just dealing, what is the koach of chokhmah? What is the power, the faculty of chokhmah? It's our first approach to understanding anything intellectual. It's koach ma. It's still asking ourselves what? It's like the flash went on and flash went off. Like you're playing with a flashlight, right? Let's say the wires are loose and you're trying to put it together, and then it goes on, but it's not tight. It just will go off right away, and you get excited because all of a sudden the wires are working, but it's not structured, adequately structured, right? Then comes bina, which is the next step. When you extract your koach, elapel, in other words, the initial state of understanding, to elapel, meaning that you bring down, you're trying to draw this flash in a more settled manner in your mind, meaning shemizbainen b'sichla, you ponder with your seichel, with your intellect, lahavin davar lashuri, to understand something thoroughly, and more so la'amkai, not only to understand it thoroughly, but profoundly understand it deeply, from that original state of chachma, right? You see the word chachma, which was in his muskel, which means muskel b'sichli, which he had in his intellect, the moment before, or the state before, which is chachma. That part, again, when you extract, you bring down from that state of chachma to broadening and thoroughly understanding the concept, and more so profoundly understanding the concept, that's called already bina. That's the second level of our intellectual faculties. And behain, when you understand something, starting from your chachma, together with your bina, inevitably, they will be the father and the mother, hamelides, which will produce and give birth to avas Hashem, v'yirasei, ufachadei, to love to Hashem, fear of Hashem, and awe of Hashem. Inevitably. Now, before even we use the words Hashem, it'll be so, and again, lahavdil, when we deal with anything else, it's inevitable that when you are dealing with something which can contribute something exciting to your life, to your schedule, to your income, and so on, things which comfort a person. Before that, you had no interest in it, you didn't see any virtue in it, it was like a piece of metal to you, no understanding of it. The moment you start understanding, and again on these two levels, someone presents the case, presents what it is. If it's a program, it's a computer, whatever it is, something which you were using contemporary examples, or examples of contemporary devices which do ultimately contribute and make our life easier. When someone starts explaining you, and all of a sudden your mind chaps that this is something interesting, and then you work on it and understanding it thoroughly, inevitably it's going to produce a feeling, an interest, a drive to it. And if it's something which you're going to learn, that someone's going to explain you, that doing this or doing that is going to harm you, there's going to be negative ramification and consequences, he's going to explain it to you thoroughly. In other words, you'll chap the idea, and more so you'll not only chap it, but you'll develop it. You will inevitably you'll give birth. In other words, this understanding will ultimately produce a notion, an expression of fear. All of a sudden you fear. Someone notified you, explained you that this way of doing things, or whatever you're doing in your books, it's something no good. When you understand it thoroughly, not only in your mind, intellectual, you realize it's not a good thing. Your heart will fear. There will be some fear in your heart from this which you learned of, because intellect, especially on these two levels, he says, Ava Ein, right? A father cannot produce, a mother herself cannot produce. It's a joint effort. A mother and a father produces the child. Similarly, then when a person understands Chokhmah, that's the first approach, that itself not necessarily produces a feeling. And in this case, when we're dealing with the godly soul has a feeling of love. Remember, like we said, it's love to Hashem. It has a feeling of yira, fear. It's fear of Hashem. But the Chokhmah itself not necessarily will produce a feeling of love or fear, because the Chokhmah, even though it's a flash and its initial state of understanding something, and to a certain extent, again, we say it's koach. It's an incredible energy which exists within the faculty of Chokhmah, but because it's still abstract, it didn't enter into Bina yet. You didn't dissect it. You didn't take it apart. You didn't do anything to thoroughly expound on the concept. Not necessarily it's going to produce a feeling of love and fear to Hashem. You have to take it, deal with it, understand again, expand on it, expound the concept, ground it. He says, la'amka, even profoundly develop it. That too, in combination, Chokhmah and Bina, will inevitably develop. And again, what is he intellectualizing? What is he understanding? As we're going to learn Be'ez Hashem next week, as he can explain different concepts, different insights of God and godliness, which Hashem did give us the ability. He did expose himself and gave us the human mind, and especially the neshama, to tap into his reality. When we tap into Hashem's reality with these two faculties of Chokhmah and Bina, inevitably it's going to develop a feeling of Ava, of love, which is associated with the attribute of Chesed. It's going to develop a feeling of fear associated with the Midah of Gvura. But again, because we're dealing with the neshama, these are faculties of the neshama, the second neshama, which is part of God. Therefore, the Alter Rebbe doesn't have to negate that it's not going to be a love to this, that, the other. Understandably, we're dealing with Ava of the neshama. It's Avas Hashem, v'yira sai, and fear from Hashem, v'achadai. We will stop over here, but I will just say, similarly, the other way around as well. Bina cannot work without Chokhmah, because if you don't have that flash, if you don't have that initial entry into the concept, the way Chokhmah contributes, or the way the Chokhmah opens up, the way the Chokhmah opens up the gates of your connection to this which you're trying to understand, Bina itself will not produce a feeling. A Midah as well, similarly like a mother on her own cannot produce. It has to be the Chokhmah, the initial grasp, that initial flash, and that initial flash is developed in the Bina. Then together they will produce Avas Hashem, Yirasei, or Pachadei.